I was wondering if you could start off just telling us about how you got started working in film and TV, and maybe talk about some of the first projects that you started working on, or some of the favorite early projects that you worked on, and talk a little bit about your path into this industry.
Sure. Well, scanot luego onde vaya esta ni giaso agat sanone nanto iges. So thrilled to be here tonight. Thank you so much to the team here for inviting me and having the screening. It's always so special to get to share this space with audiences. I'm, incredibly grateful too that my family, who's visiting from upstate New York, got to be here tonight. My sister, we were just chatting backstage that I'm the little mother to my nieces, and so they're such an inspiration to me, and I just moved them up from Oklahoma, our reservation in Oklahoma, to our ancestral lands on Cayuga Lake, so I'm thrilled that they got to be here. It's special to share that space with them. I guess I always wanted to be, well, I always really loved storytelling, and I loved the storytellers in my community, and loved when speakers in the Longhouse would speak and get people riled up. And I also loved, like, my uncles are really great storytellers, and I always recognized their ability to get people to lean in when they were telling a story, and I kind of recognized that exchange, and I was like, I want to be a person that makes people lean in. Like, how do you, like, I want to have that talent. And then I was definitely the like overachieving neighbor girl that would get everyone together to do like plays and trampoline routines, and my sister hates that part of our past, but she was my first star. And I got my mom to buy me a VHS recorder at Goodwill, and I would edit tape to tape. But I don't think I actually knew that filmmaking was a path, like a job. And certainly if I knew that, like watching Tarantino movies in like the late 90s or whatever, I didn't recognize that a woman could do that job. And I remembered being 21 years old, almost graduating college, when I saw a film called High Art by Lisa Cholodenko, which was this, queer movie that was like, I was recognizing all these themes inside of it, and I was coming into my own queerness. And I saw her name at the end of the credits, and I was like, holy shit, a woman can direct a movie? And I'm glad that there are things like the internet, and like people recognize that those things are jobs sooner. And then I knew that was a viable path, and I started working, making kind of like more serious short films with like friends and like peers. We would work on each other's films on the weekend. I worked as a PA on a couple of projects that came through the Midwest, and then it was working on this movie. I remember like the second AD had just worked on a David Fincher film, and like there were all these people from LA, and I was like, oh, I can move to LA. They're just normal people. Like there were all these like epiphanies that I had along the way that took me longer probably than I would have liked it to. And so I remember I was working at a strip club, and I was like, I'm gonna save up $2,000, and when I have $2,000, I'm gonna move out to LA. And so I moved out to LA, and I lived there for 13 years, working in various parts of the industry, working as an assistant to a producer. I was making, documentaries on the weekends with like my own money. And then I realized like healthcare is a need, and you don't really get paid or have healthcare in these jobs that I was doing. So I got a job in advertising, and then I spent over a decade working in advertising, producing projects there, and then moved to New York, switched over to publishing, and still remembered this dream that I had. So I decided to make a short film, really give it my all. Lily Gladstone was in that film. It premiered at Sundance, and then doors just started opening for me, and got reps, started working TV, started writing, started directing, and then I packaged this film and got to make the film. So long-winded answer. But that's the journey.
It's great. It's great. I think it's important for people to hear, that it's not always just move there and get the job and everything happens magically. And that film the first film with Lily, was that Little Chief?
Yeah,
From
yeah.
2020, and that
Yeah.
also showed at Sundance, right?
Yes, that premiered at Sundance in 2020, and then the whole time I was working in advertising and I was working in these like media jobs that were kind of like adjacent, I kind of was always like frustrated by them because I always wanted to be doing creative work. But then now looking back on that, it was such a great gift to go into my short film and to go into my feature, knowing how to produce projects and understanding how to put things together and knowing what all of that was. I'm very grateful now to be able to be a hands-on producer in my work. And so I always encourage folks that I talk to, especially students, to like take the path that gets you closest to your dream, and while you're on that path, just try and like soak up anything and everything that will pay off in your dreams later. Do I wish that I had made my first feature before being 40 years old? Yes, but would I have been able to? No, because it took me till I was 40 to do it.
So segueing a little bit into the film that we saw tonight, I wanted to ask you, I mean, Fancy Dance is set on the Seneca-Cayuga Nation Reservation and in parts of Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma City. Can you talk a little bit about the development of the story that the film is based on? How did it evolve? You co-wrote the script with Mishiana Elise, and maybe if you could talk a little bit about how this story evolved and how you worked together, and provide a little bit of information
Sure.
in that regard, that would be great.
Yeah, so I was working kind of this job that I should have been so happy in, and I was just miserable. And I had remembered this dream that I had always had, and so I quit my job and I moved to a small reserve in Canada to learn my language Cayuga full-time. It was a 3-year-long program where I would be with my cohort of 8 students, speaking Cayuga 8 hours a day, and that night I would write. And so I wrote a film called Little Chief, and when that premiered at Sundance, there was a response to the film, and I didn't want to take that and make that story bigger, but I recognized that people were attracted to the character that Lily played in that film and the world. It was actually the school where my sister and my mom taught, was where the story took place. And so I just started outlining Fancy Dance. I was learning Cayuga, I was learning the familial word, so I had just recently learned that the word for your aunt on your mother's side was Knoha'a, little mother. I was seeing this incredibly beautiful matrilineal matriarchy system in the language that was preserved in the language. You know, for example, I was learning that if you don't know the gender of a person, it's a she. If it's a mixed gender group of people, they're all she's. It's like literally the opposite of English in terms of how the language is rooted in and shows so much about what the culture looked like pre-contact that's been eroded and lost to colonialism. And so I saw this image in my head of an aunt and a niece dancing, and I was like, how can I use this film as part of my efforts in the language revitalization, doing that work, and how can I get this aunt and this niece to this moment of dancing in catharsis at the end of the film. So I outlined it. I had about 20 pages written. The pandemic hit, these topics that are so hard, like forced removal and the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples crisis. I was just feeling very lonely in that work, and I had met Mishiana Elise, this incredible Tlingit writer from Alaska, at a Sundance lab. And I slid into her DMs and I was like, I don't know if you remember me, but I loved your rom-com that you wrote. And I would love some of that rom-com sensibility in this story, because really this is a film it's a love story, and it's a film about these two people who are kind of going in and out of their relationship with each other, and and so her incredible rom-com that I loved, I was like, let's put some of that flavor on this. And so we wrote the script together throughout the pandemic. We just did it remotely through Zoom, and yeah, that's how it all came to be.
So the Cayuga language is a crucial element, and it's really fascinating to hear that it kind of germinated when you were in this language immersion program. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you decided to integrate Cayuga language into the film and into the script. What kind of work did that entail in terms of writing, but also working with the actors in the film? And were there certain motivations for scenes where you wove in Cayuga language and other scenes that you did not? If you could speak to
I
that.
love this question because I can nerd out about language all day long. So, yeah. So currently in the world, there are only 21 first language Cayuga speakers left. It's considered an extinct language. And most of those speakers are in Canada. There's kind of 3 geographical locations where the Haudenosaunee live, which are in Canada, New York, and then Oklahoma. And in Oklahoma, we lost our last speaker in 1989. So I was not brought up or raised around the language. There were memorized speeches that you would hear in the Longhouse. But I, was privileged enough to be able to take time off from work to go do this program. And it was something that was a vital, important aspect of the filmmaking process. One of the women who was in my cohort, Kisa Parker, came on as our language consultant. We did 2 weeks of immersion with Lily and Isabel. They would do 4 hours of immersion and then 4 hours of dance. And they came and did that for 2 weeks. We wove language in, we didn't want it to just be kind of like a performative thing on the screen. We wanted it to feel like the living, breathing language that it is, or that we hope it to be, because there actually isn't a world where this happens, right? Like, it's starting to happen with these immersion programs, and there's a lot of schools that are bringing up younger kids, but this is like the goal, is to have young people speaking the language fluently. So as we were aspirational for that to be something that exists in the world, we wanted to do our part culturally on the film, and so we worked with elders to, because the language is really stagnant. And when you don't use a language, you don't have words for everything. So the fun part is working with elders and speakers to come up with words that might not already exist. And so we came up with the words for action, cut, rolling, sound speeds. And we printed these lanyards off and gave them to the whole crew. And by the 3rd day, just everyone was speaking in Cayuga and using the rolls in Cayuga. And one of my favorite anecdotes that I love to share is months after we wrapped the film, my AD, who was not native, messaged me from a soundstage overnight in LA and was like, I was so tired, I just yelled out "Satrice," which means moving on to the whole and I was like, keep using it, just tell them what it means and have them use it too. So language was a really important part. We were thoughtful about, when they would go in and out of it, and we wanted it to feel very special as it is, and that it was something that the 2 of them shared together that not everyone else had access to, which is sometimes can feel very rare in native spaces. And so you covet the moments that you get to cherish your relationships and cherish your culture. And so there were just such beautiful moments where they got to speak with each other. And one of my greatest moments so far in this journey, and it'll make me tear up, was screening the film in Toronto, which is about 40 miles from the reserve where I did my immersion program. And we bussed in all of the elders, and they watched the film, and they were like, "You did a good job." They're like, "Neonre." And that just to sit there and watch these incredibly beautiful people that have shepherded our language when it was not meant to survive, watch this film and see their language on the big screen for the first time. I was like, you did good.
Wow, that must have been an amazing moment to share that with them and to have that feedback from people. Another vital force in the film, of course, is dance. The film is called Fancy Dance. I love how you use the DVD player and the photo album at different scenes in the film to kind of reveal the power of dance as a kind of, the sharing of dance across generations of women, and the use of those other media, photography and DVDs to kind of draw attention and draw the viewer into that in a different way. And I just wanted to ask if you could talk about dance as a cultural and social force in the film, especially since the narrative kind of culminates in the powwow at the end, and multiple themes and issues in the film are kind of brought together in that gathering. And so if you could just speak to what is happening with dance. It is not just the fancy dance in the film, it's also stripping. You deal with the complexity of dance options in these life worlds, and I thought that was really interesting too. There wasn't like a totally purist account of the ways people within this community might take up dance, So.
Yeah. So we worked with Holly Sue Gray, who is this incredible fancy shawl dancer, and she came in and she helped choreograph all of the dance scenes. She actually plays Towie. So all of the images that you see of Towie was she was our the person who headed up all of our choreography and taught all the dance. And yeah, I think dance is such a huge part of the culture, and I didn't actually do powwow dance growing up. My sister was the Indian princess. But I always was, I spent a lot of time at powwows and in that culture, and it's just a big part of living in Oklahoma, whether you're native or not native. It's something that's, in the summer, they're happening all the time, and you come together, and it's this community gathering. And so we wanted there to be a physical manifestation of their cultural love. And so that was in dance, because that's what it feels like when you go to a powwow, and you just have everyone there that you love, and you're expressing, and there's music, and there's corn dogs, and there's strawberry drink, and it's just a really fun space to be in. And yeah, as a person who had worked in a strip club and has been a sex worker, I thought it was important to not it's frustrating to watch the coverage or the representation of Native Americans, and all you see is poverty porn, and it's just when you see the white gaze and the white savior nature of that. But then also in response to that, there can be this kind of going in the other direction where you're just telling stories about model minorities. And for me, I was it's really important to recognize that Towie deserved to be found and deserved to be looked for regardless of what her job was, and that sex workers and queer folks and trans folks and all folks deserve to be searched for when they go missing, and their cases deserve the respect of investigation when they are murdered. And so for me, it was important to show the beauty of a mother who works for a living to provide the best home that she can for her child, and that when she's ripped from that family, what that does to the people who are left behind. And the jacket wasn't in the first couple passes, but I used to have a set that I danced in. And we were trying to figure out ways to bring Towie in and to have Roki have something physical that represented her connection to her mother. And so I just love the innocence of her loving her mother and looking up to her mother as this beautiful caretaker that she was for her, and taking that jacket and wrapping it around her as a representation of her hug and her love. And then to see that jacket take flight at the end sorry, when I talk about Towie, it just gets me so emotional. Yeah. But to see that finally, you don't see it move, and you don't see her dance until the very end, and to have Towie present with the two of them when she takes flight in that jacket, it was just a discovery in the script writing to find a way to get that there. And now it's like, how is that not always there from the beginning? So.
Yeah.
Oh, one more thing I will say
go for
about the powwow, just because I think that this is just another, like, as folks in here, if there are wanting to tell their own stories, is just understanding how you tell those stories and why you're telling stories from your community. And I remember we threw this powwow because it was during the pandemic, and we couldn't like go into one. So we had to hire all these extras and bring in all these native folks to come and be in the powwow, and all the dancers and the vendors and all of that. And so I remember going to my producer the week before the powwow, and I was like, I need $2,000. And they were like, why do you need $2,000? You don't just get to have $2,000 when you ask for it. And I was like, well, I need to buy raffle prizes for the powwow. And we bought a big screen TV and a bunch of raffle prizes, and throughout the night we were raffling them off, and we told the folks, we're like, at 6 a.m. we're gonna be raffling off a big screen TV. And they stayed because they wanted to win that TV. And my mom sent me a screenshot of a Facebook post that was like, the girls got tired last night, like who ended up winning the TV? And so there was like, and so I always just say, like, you know, tell stories in your own way and tell them in your community the way that you know that you'll reach like the people around you. And I love that we got to have a real raffle at the powwow that night, and you know, Donnie won the TV. So.
Another really important aspect of the film is queer identity and culture, and it was really great to see Lily Gladstone playing Jax, such a complex, fascinating character. One of the reports that I read about the film said that the intent of the film was to spread awareness of the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, but it was also to serve as a love letter to the often marginalized heroes of Native American communities. And I'm wondering, you know, I'd love to hear you talk about whether you perceive queer folks as some of these marginalized heroes of these communities, and if you could just say a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I think it was a love letter to the folks that keep our communities safe. And like, I think about the work that my mother and my sister have done in our community teaching our youth, and I think about all of the aunties that are like out on the front lines and are literally like going into homes to like, you know, to put a body in between domestic violence. I think about the harrowing work that I witnessed from my elders growing up in my communities. And Jax is doing everything she can in her own way, even though she doesn't make the right decisions every time. The intention behind every one of her decisions is to keep her family safe. And I witnessed that growing up, and I was saved. You know, I was saved by my mother's ability to exit a very violent relationship. I was saved by domestic violence shelters growing up when we didn't have anywhere else to go that were ran by these sorts of women. And so I think it's important to talk about those heroes and recognize that when you can't call the police and you can't get a response from the FBI, and you don't have a tribal force that has the ability to prosecute these cases, it is the women of our community that are left to do what they can to provide safety. And it is our uncles and it's our aunties and it's the queer folks in our community that are left in those roles. And I know for a fact I wouldn't be sitting here on this stage in this form if I hadn't had those heroes growing up.
Yeah. One of the powerful scenes it's a short scene, but it's very visually powerful and also acoustically really important, is where the community members are moving through a field and you have a wide shot and they're calling out Tawi's name, Waratawi, and moving through this field in synchronized fashion, kind of searching for her. And it just, watching that, I think just is really powerful. And can you talk a little bit about that scene? And I mean, I grew up in Montana, and I've seen people actually doing this for missing women. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that. It's sort of a fleeting scene, but for me it was like so important, the way you shot it and the sound of that scene as well.
Yeah, so that I've done, work on and off with the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, which is an organization that helps specifically Native communities organize at a grassroots level, and they'll go into different communities, and someone may have, like, we're trying to get rape kits in our village in Alaska, or like each one of them may have different goals, and this organization helps give them the resources and the tools to like bring people together and accomplish goals. And so I've been to so many different Indigenous communities, and I've witnessed this happening in most of them, and they're all very similar, and it's extremely hard to talk about them because every time you witness a search like that, you recognize that that means that someone is missing or someone is gone, and the family members and the community members that are out there doing that are not only is it an action that is necessary in the investigative process of finding someone who's missing, but it's also a way to hold vigil and to be together and to be on the land. And in our culture specifically, the name of someone who has passed becomes more powerful, and you pass it on by generation. My Native name, it comes from those who've come before you. And so for me, it was so powerful to have this community out, saying her name. And it's interesting because not everyone loves that scene. And some people, and the criticism is probably valid that it's a little different than the rest of the film and it's more meditative. But I fought for it because I think that it's a beautiful kind of gut-wrenching exercise of survival and holding prayer and space as a community. Sorry, I keep crying, guys.
How can you not? It's like,
I'm really funny, I promise.
Can you talk a little bit about the reception of fancy dance within the Seneca-Cayuga community? And I'm sure you've screened it there, and what kind of a response have you had? I know you just also this is in Oklahoma, not in the Seneca-Cayuga Nation, but that you just received this year an Achievement in Oklahoma Independent Filmmaking Award for fancy dance. So the reception in the state of Oklahoma seems to be really favorable and strong toward this film. But what about your community?
Yeah, I mean, it's been great to share the film there and to share the film also where I currently live on Haudenosaunee lands, and then also to show it up in Six Nations territory up north. And the response has been great. And I think, we shot in Oklahoma, mostly on Cherokee Nation land, because we live a little bit further out of like the hub of production folks. But yeah, we had lots of Native folks working on the film. I also work on Reservation Dogs that shot, it's gone now. We shot that in Oklahoma, and my showrunner Sterling Harjo's built up this beautiful crew of Native folks, and so it's been great, and now we just sold the film to Apple, so the film will have a theatrical release and will be available worldwide on the Apple platform, and so I'm excited that it means that the reach of the film will go even further, and hopefully, Haudenosaunee folks who haven't seen the film will get to see it, and others as well.
I mean, that's a big deal. So congratulations on the Apple
Thanks, Lily Gladstone.
Yay! I mean, we're really happy to hear that, and also that Lily has been such an advocate of the film. And I think she was here honored last week, and I believe she told some of our staff in the theater to tell you hello.
I got like a picture.
Yeah.
Lily's incredible. She's a dear friend of mine and a cherished collaborator, and I'm so thrilled for her success this year and her bravery in continuing to speak about our film when she was kind of there on these stages to talk about her other film, Killers of the Flower Moon. I think is also just a testament to the same kind of like community and generosity that you see from the characters in this film. I think she wants to scoop up all of her Indigenous collaborators and all of the others that maybe she hasn't worked with yet and take them with her and us with her as they are in this, I think they're gonna probably win an Oscar, hopefully. But what a gift to have Lily Gladstone in my life.
Absolutely. And what about working with Isabel Deroy-Olson, who played Roki? How were you able to work with her in this film and cast her?
Yeah, so the very first monies that we received for the film were through some soft money, some grant. Like this is before we had a production plan or financiers or anything. And my producing partner, Deidre Bax, and I knew that from very early on we wanted to spend the money on casting because we knew finding Roki was going to be the biggest challenge of all. And it took us almost 2 years. We did a or North American-wide casting search, and we saw some incredibly talented young Indigenous actors, but I hadn't quite found the one I was looking for because Lily is so big and is so present and is like just their face just takes up that screen and the eyes, and we needed someone who could counter her in a way that she wouldn't just fall behind Lily's star power. And I was working on a series for AMC called Dark Winds, and we were casting a pregnant teen, and Isabel's tape came across the screen, and she looked way too young to play this pregnant teen. We were like, we don't want a pregnant 12-year-old. And so I just immediately took her name and wrote our casting director, and I said, I think I've found her. And she did one reading on a Zoom with me, and she's also just really like a spitfire, and she's just like gave me every day and gave Lily and like pranked everybody and was like running around, but she's also like a trained dancer, so she's very poised, so she really tricks you into like believing her like innocence and grace until she like gets a good prank over on you, and just is just this incredible soul and picked up the language very quickly. And they are working, like she played young Lily in Lily's upcoming television series. And they get dinner together all the time when Lily's working in Vancouver. So if I did anything in this world, it was, putting those two together to be friends. Film or no film, it's a beautiful relationship, and I've become very close with her and her family as well.
Oh, that's great. I think we're probably going to open it up to audience in a few minutes, but before we do, I just want to just talk a little bit about the tension in the film between law enforcement in dealing with the major issues of missing and murdered Indigenous women and the kind of incompetence and negligence and ignorance around those issues from formal law enforcement on the one hand, and then the kind of other systems of caretaking and investigation that the film takes really seriously and tries to pursue in different ways. I also realized when I was rewatching it again tonight that the film is both, it's a narrative that's both like it's a search and it's an escape simultaneously in the second half of the film, which must have been like tricky to write and segment and sequence. But if you could just talk maybe both in terms of the film, but maybe more generally about these issues of where are we at with law enforcement's inability to really sufficiently pay attention to this issue? And what are our options? How can we support other pathways of care, investigation, and support for the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see this similar kind of quagmire of injustice in lots of places where like colonialism, patriarchy, white supremacy have like influxed their disease into everything. But it's by design, you know, it's by design to take a community of people that you don't want to have any rightful claim over what is a rightful claim, and suck off all resources. And one of those resources is life, and one of those resources is getting justice for crimes committed against you. And I mean, you know, the Violence Against Women Act didn't cover Alaska till very recently. You know, we've been forcibly removing Native children from their communities since the boats arrived, and you know, it's not an exaggeration what's reflected here. If anything, we could have gone further down the rabbit hole of a procedural, but like that's not the movie that I wanted to make. But you know, my sister, my mom, you know, work in our community and dealt with CPS a lot. Do you call and have CPS come and remove the kid from the community and adopt it out potentially, or do you not call? And maybe it's better that they stay. I mean, these are the kinds of questions that our educators are dealing with on a daily basis in the schools, because the system's so messed up that there's not like a right or wrong answer. It's very complicated, which is a reason why we didn't want Jax to be perfect. We wanted there to be a little bit of like, well, should it be Jax or should it be the grandparents? And you're like, no, it should definitely be Jax. You know, my mom, you know, who looks very different than I do, has dealt with these sorts of things. You know, she's been pulled off a Greyhound bus and been asked to show her papers or like proof that she should be living in the United States. You know, when you go, the closer that you get, you know, to the border in Texas, the more that you see these very aggressive systems. Like the ICE officers will just park in front of pharmacies and Walmarts where people need to go to get like things to live their daily lives. And so, you know, we wanted to show this scene where they're speaking their language. It's misinterpreted as a different language. Oh, maybe they're not supposed to be in this country. And like, that's what they're concerned about, but they're not concerned about finding this missing woman. And so, yeah, it's tough because like with the show like Reservation Dogs, where you hope that you're getting folks to laugh 1 minute and then cry the next, we didn't quite go the comedy route with this, but we wanted to blend the genre so that as you're watching the film, you're terrified of what's gonna happen with this ICE officer, and then 30 seconds later, Roki's cracking a joke about how she bled all over the cop's car and used her menses as a weapon against the police. And so being from Native spaces, you learn to navigate the blending of those genres because you need your family and humor and laughter and love to kind of get through some of the more dramatic, serious, like oppressive systems. And so I don't know if I answered your question, but those, we didn't want to make a procedural, but we wanted the exhibition of how fucked up our justice system is to be in the background, creating dramatic forces against our beautiful, you know, family that's surviving with each other through the space.
Wow. Last question for me is, what are you working on next?
Well, fancy dance has been a full-time job.
I can imagine.
I'm currently working on Dark Winds season 3. I was unable to do season 2 because we were doing the film. I have a couple of television shows in development, and I have I really want to do like genre stuff next. I'm working on a horror film right now that I'm putting together, and then Michiana and I are coming back together. We're working on a sexy thriller. I love the 90s. I want to subvert those movies and make something that you recognize but is also surprising. So lots of stuff. I feel extremely blessed and excited that I get to do this for a living, share it with my family and my nieces. My niece McKenna is an incredible poet, and we write together, and we have projects that we work on. So yeah, just anything and everything that I can get my hands on that calls me.
Do you do embroidery as well? Because I saw there's a great piece in the LA Times where there's a self-portrait that you did it's like an embroidered piece that's just so stunning and beautiful.
Yeah,
and
I learned it from my mama.
And I also love the poster for this, for the
Yeah.
event tonight. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so
Sorry, I have so many questions.
no,
We're
this
going
great.
on and on.
This great Indigenous artist did an illustration for my short film, and then when you do festivals and like screenings like this, before the studios make you an official poster, which will come next for the Apple release, I just had her do both of them, and they're so beautiful, and I'll probably continue to have that be part of it. But I do recognize the marketing people are right that Lily Gladstone's face should be very clear on the poster. So there will be a poster coming soon. But I was so, it was awesome to see the big blown up. I've sent a picture to Lily and Isabel, and they were loving it out front.
Great.
So thank you for that.
So I think at this point we can turn it over to if the audience members have any questions. We have people going around with mics. So if you could raise your hand and they'll come and find you, and then we will be able to hear your question or your comment.
I noticed there was a conversation between Lily's character and her father about staying on the reservation, leaving the reservation, and I heard you say earlier you had moved your family up to ancestral lands, and so I'd be interested to hear you talk about just that, the connection to the land, what that means to you and to Native populations in general, and to, I don't know, just any of your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think, Jackson answering that question is just well, why would we leave? It's her community, and it's what ties, the land is what ties your community together, and it's what ties you to the space and nature around you, which is such a vital part of community and a vital part of us all being here and being alive. And I think I would have probably stayed in Oklahoma and would still be living in Oklahoma. It's a really weird climate politically, my sister's shaking her head. My nephew is trans, and I don't know if you guys saw this news, but a young citizen of the Cherokee Nation was just beaten to death in their school in Owasso in Cherokee country. The anti-trans legislation, the violent rhetoric from the politicians make it almost unsafe for queer folks and trans folks to live, go to school, and be there. And the statistics of violence are even higher when you're Native or live in, surrounding communities of Native reservations. And so I'm so grateful that we get to live on our ancestral lands on Cayuga Lake in upstate New York. It's beautiful and wonderful, and our mom still lives down in Seneca, and lots of friends and family. So it's tough because you want to stay in the community where you are, and sometimes you can't. And we had the privilege because of my job and what I do. My sister is a single mom of 3, and she's a teacher, and so not everyone can move, right? So anyway, what a really depressing answer to your question. But land is everything, and we should all be so, have that right to live and be where we belong and be safe there. Yeah, please, one more. We can't end the night with that as the last answer.
Hello, thank you for being here. I study film, but I'm really interested in linguistics, and I really appreciated what you said about language and how you portrayed language in the film in a way that you described doesn't exist really in the real world currently. So I was wondering during pre-production if you faced any pushback against that and how you overcame that challenge to really emphasize the importance of having the language be portrayed in this way in your film.
Well, I love that you study both of those things. That is just like, let's hang out sometime. No. I was very blessed in that I had a really great producing partner, Deidre Bax, who understood what I wanted to do and understood that the language was the cornerstone of the film and was just as important as any other aspect. And we took our film through the Sundance labs, and we were just on a mission to find partners who would recognize what we were trying to do. We made a very small movie with a very small budget that isn't gonna break box office records, but that it is valuable in what it does and what it achieves. And the fact that we got this Apple sale is great because you get to pay your financiers back and you get to make money for them. And but yeah, ultimately, I knew we would need the immersion. Again, this kind of goes back to my previous jobs as a producer. I was able to be in those conversations and say, no, we can move this money from here to here. This is vital, this is necessary. The film doesn't happen without it. And I just had really incredible partners who believed in that and wanted that to be there. So I really didn't have much pushback at all. If anything, we would have loved to have included more, but perhaps we just didn't have the time because you are on an independent film, you are shooting so quickly, and the Cayuga scenes take 2 to 3 times longer to shoot just to make sure you've got the person making sure everything sounds right and you're just going back and forth. And but yeah, what a beautiful process it was to get to make this film and to get to talk to you all tonight about Cayuga. It's what a dream. Better last answer.
Thank you all for coming, and thanks to Erica and her family. I'm really glad you all came tonight, and tell others about the film. It's going to be on Apple, which is great. And thanks also to the Carsey Wolf Center staff for organizing, and all the students who are in the room running the event too. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.